Hello, all, and welcome. I have with me today John Moore, Chief Investment Officer at StratView Wealth Management, and Kaya Member. John contributed a great piece to our blog series back in January titled Alignment Over Access, Gauging the Fit Between Alternative Investment Strategies and Their Fund Structures, honing in on a topic that has been of great interest lately: the repackaging and flooding of alternative investments for the wealth management space. The critical question here goes beyond, is this a good strategy, and really goes more into, does the structure of these products genuinely support the underlying strategy and suitability for the client, or was the strategy forced into uh, to fit a convenient wrapper? So we're here today to expand on this. And before we dive in, John, why don't you tell us a little bit about what prompted you to write on this topic in the first place?
Sure. And Georgina, thanks to you, Aaron, and the entire team for all you do for the alts industry. And thanks for having me here today. Looking forward to it. When it comes to alternatives, I believe strongly that the vehicle is not just the wrapper around the strategy, but rather should be directly part of the investment thesis. So even if we just zoom back a few years, uh, where so much of the industry's focus was on celebrating new access to alternatives, and understandably, because rates were so low, stocks and bonds were down hard together. And so these new solutions were introduced at a time that was very favorable. Certainly, there was a massive business incentive for the investment firms who create these products, and allocators are always looking for new tools to add to a portfolio. It's really no surprise that over the past 3 years, as Aaron recently described, uh, assets in evergreen vehicles has doubled. So now that we fast forward to today, now that we've seen a few more years of the retailization of alts experiment, if you will, we've seen some bumps in the road. We've hit some potholes, whether it be fundamentals at the strategy level or some interesting news stories at the individual fund level. The vehicle component, which had largely been under discussed when things were sailing smoothly, is
Right.
now front and center, whether it be in headlines at conferences or in LinkedIn discussions that are happening all the time.
So, from your seat as an allocator in the private wealth channel, what's top of mind for you as you approach the alternative investment space?
Absolutely. And thanks for that question. I'd say at a high level, two main things: suitability and knowing what you own. Neither of those will be surprising, but they're both just so important. So, suitability, we think about not only from, of course, the client standpoint, is this solution aligned with the client's goals, risk tolerance, time horizon, liquidity, et cetera, but also from a process standpoint. And that involves both an operational and a self awareness component to it, thinking about how do we manage money for clients? Is this something that aligns with our approach to doing that? And as you can imagine, of course, there may be very different answers from client to client, strategy to strategy, and process to process.
Right. So, you bring up a good point because now with this expanded access, it means that both the client and the advisor have such a wealth of opportunity in front of them and so many different options. So,
Right.
with that mindset, what has stood out to you when navigating the opportunities and the challenges that have come with that increased access?
Absolutely. I think first I think about the phrasing in general of private equity, private credit, hedge funds. These are
Yeah.
not strategies. They're big umbrella terms, each of which have dozens of approaches and flavors to access the opportunities within those spaces. And so um, the opportunities are legitimate, whether there be ways to improve diversification, improve our risk management, adding genuine, high quality new growth opportunities into a portfolio. Sometimes there may be tax advantages. The operational efficiencies have saved a ton of time. Collectively, these are aspects that have bolstered the value that we can add to clients. At the same time, I do worry sometimes that it's so easy to be involved with these solutions that the combination of rapid product introduction and potentially diluted diligence may lead to some more indigestion in the space. And if we think about that for a second, to really allocate thoughtfully to a new asset class involves getting a grip on an area of the markets that may not be previously familiar, deeply
Right.
understanding the strategy, a specific management team, the specific fund, the operational logistics of the vehicle, potential co-investor risk, who is going to be in this investment with me, and then what I'll call menu evolution risk, where allocators are faced with committing capital with a long-term mindset, not knowing if just a few months later, there may be some other solution that becomes available that may have been a preferred alternative. So these are the types of complexities through which investors are navigating in this environment.
You made a very good analogy in the piece that you wrote for us that, this is akin to high, fine dining restaurant food, not having the same effect when you get it for delivery. Something gets lost in that transition in the process of, whether you're sitting down, white linen tablecloth, eating it the way it's supposed to be eaten and enjoying the product the way it's supposed to be
Sure.
versus on the other end. So that kind of leads us back to alignment over access. How did you go about creating this framework for initial diligence around those structural aspects of alternative investments?
Sure. I think at the core, the question from my standpoint is, does the structure properly support the strategy, or is the strategy retrofitted to fit the convenience of the structure? So is the dog wagging the tail, or is the tail wagging the dog? And in some ways it's one way, and in many other situations that may not be the case. And so having a process not only to assess a strategy, but to assess the way that that strategy is delivered, whether that can fully support value creation over a full cycle as intended, and how that relates to the behavioral dynamics of that fund with its investor base too, I think are really important. So among many of the different topics to consider, three that I'll reference today. We can start with liquidity. Unsurprisingly, I think that when most folks think about liquidity, they think about dollars going out because that's the loud part. That's the part that you see and feel most acutely. What about assets coming in, being able to allocate at any given time to a strategy? Does that imply that there's always a readily available, high quality landing place for those assets, or does it stay in cash? How is that cash managed? What operational and return impacts might that have on the strategy? I think aligning liquidity is both an economic and a behavioral protection. The next is management flexibility. So, is the management team actually able to continue to execute on its full toolkit that earned it um, its initial regard and reputation, or are some of the guardrails of convenience that may be put in place in one of the more investor-friendly funds curbing its ability to do that to its fullest extent? And then finally, no surprise, the fee structure. Are we rewarding skill or scale? And how do you manage that? I think thoughtful fee architecture should support a long term partnership and reveals a lot about the underlying incentives, the way that these funds are set up. So, again, just a few of many examples and a framework that can be more individually tailored when allocating to this space.
So, given all of this, where do you see the future of these products going? Do you see a change in suitability standards? Is this more of a change that advisors are going to have to change the way they approach suitability and questions on liquidity with their clients, or is the onus more so on the institutional space to kind of reevaluate how these products are really structured?
I think it starts by recognizing that there's no substitute for doing your homework. And in a fiduciary role, doing the best that you can to assess the opportunities and make sure that they align with, again, the way that your clients need value and the way that you manage money is important. And then voting with your feet. I think being vocal with these various investment teams about what parts of the process really matter, independent of just the access to the strategy itself, I think can lead to some um, innovative and prudent adjustments in the way that some of the terms and conditions are set up to align the experience much more with what investors actually need. Because in some ways, folks, especially in the headlines these days, hear about gating. And if the fund is operating the way it's supposed to, that's a protection during a time when the strategy may be able to do some of its best work. But if the fund's not doing what it was supposed to be doing, well, then that becomes an obstacle. And so I think that further conversation, further ideas, and further discussion, I think, will be really important in this space. And I know that Kai has been leading some of those efforts.
Yes, it's certainly been a topic of great interest lately, especially with the blow up of alternative investments throughout, all of the investment industry.
Right.
And with more interest and more demand, of course, comes a greater deal of products. And a lot of these institutional products, like you said, have been repurposed, repackaged, And as they, filter into the private wealth management space, it's of course really important and ever the more, critical to make sure that they're being done in the right way. So
Yes.
part of that is having conversations with people such as yourself, and will hopefully be, like you said, the guardrails to making sure that, at the end of the day, clients' money is protected. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you again for contributing the wonderful piece that you did. If you haven't had a chance, please make sure you get a chance to read it. And thank you for being with us today. And thank you all for watching.
Of course, and I'll just add thanks to the many folks with whom I'm grateful to spend time with and who are very talented and passionate about getting this right across the industry. Thanks to my StratView team, and thanks to you, Georgina, for the delightful conversation today.